So, without further delay, let's get this event started. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Guthrie to the stage.
All right, thank you, Doug. Check, check, 1, 2, 1, 2. I'll just welcome you again to this event for the annual Ted Johnson Lecture. And what I'll do is bring someone who knows Professor Johnson much better than I, who can tell you about his legacy. But our sponsors and our hosts, in addition to Sun Entertainment, the Black Student Union, the Alumni Engagement Office, especially Ms. Eva Johnson, the President's Office, the NAU Foundation, and of course my department, Ethnic Studies. Booker Evans is coming to speak to you today, and Booker is a longtime supporter of NAU. He's a Social and Behavioral Sciences College Hall of Famer and the founder of the Ted Johnson Lecture Series. So without any further delay, let me bring to the stage Mr. Booker T. Evans, Jr.
Good evening. I know you didn't come to hear me talk, you came to hear Michel, so I'm going to be brief and see if I can cover just a few things. For those of you that don't know, Mr. Johnson, Professor Johnson, was at NAU for initially 30 years, from 1969 to 1999. He taught in the English and Literature department, and he was the sponsor, supporter, faculty supporter, advisor for many of the groups on campus here, including the fraternity that I'm a part of, Kappa Alpha Psi. He was a member of that fraternity and served as our sponsor while I was a student here. I was never taught by Dr. Johnson. I'd long finished my early English composition classes by the time he arrived. But my relationship with him grew exponentially, both while he was here and while I was here at school and afterwards. I can tell you that we were in a battle to have a professor of color on campus. It was the 1960s. There was a civil rights movement. There was a war in Vietnam. There were protests going on almost daily. I spoke with our president, then Lawrence Walkup, about the need for a more diverse faculty. And that wasn't a term in those days. There was no such term as diversity. There were a limited number of minority students on campus. Most of the African American students on campus were black males who were involved in either basketball or football. There were very few people who were purely students. We're proud of what the university has gone through since then, but it was with Ted's leadership that we were able to start this recruiting process and start to get more students interested in being a part of Northern Arizona University. I think that if I had to put into a simple term what Ted meant to us, is he was our guide. He provided a light on a path to success for those of us who were here at the time. The beauty of what he did is he was very direct. He didn't pull punches, and he either with us or the remaining faculty and administration, stated what he thought was true, and he stood by it. And I think all of us who were on campus at that time learned to do the same. I will tell you that he had a hand in starting the Ethnic Studies department. He had retired and returned to the institution in the early 2000s to kind of shepherd the Ethnic Studies program and get that thing, get it started. It's been very beneficial to the campus, to learn about other cultures, to learn and to be inclusive. Ted was not a professor for the black students, the African American students, or however you want to phrase it. He was a professor for all students, believed in unity, believed in the kind of diverse population that would make this country grow. What we talked about, what we had in common is I'd spent a good deal of my young life in the old South. I'm from Mississippi. Ted was from northern Florida, a place that we commonly refer to in the South as Lower Alabama. And he and I talked a lot about voting. My grandmother and my maternal grandmother, the first opportunity she had to cast a ballot, was afraid to go vote because people had been killed for approaching the polls. People had been killed for registering to vote. We talked about the importance of educating our population and getting students who were of age to vote and to be a part of the political scene. I'm saying that this year because I have a special interest in all of you participating. 2020 is an election year. So as a commercial from me, get out to vote. You can read this short blurb about Ted. A wonderful man, a family man, a great professor, people that reached out to students, students flocked to him. It didn't matter if you were Black, Hispanic, Caucasian, it didn't make any difference to Ted. Ted was here to help, Ted was here to grow people, and grow people that would be a part of a great nation, a great institution. So I want to end with this. I think that the purpose of having this lecture series is to keep the name alive of the first man who was on this campus, the first man of color to teach on this campus and to be a part of this. I said this to a smaller group earlier. As long as people know your name, you don't ever die. So we want to keep Ted Johnson alive. He was important to me. He was important to everyone here. And he's important to you whether you realize it or not. So thank you very much.
So you might know her as the weekend host of All Things Considered, where she draws on her deep reporting and interviewing experience to cover the week's news. She was on the radio 6 hours yesterday trying to cover the impeachment trial. But with more than 25 years as a journalist, Michel has contributed to ABC News, ABC Nightline, The Washington Post, National Politics and Policy at the Wall Street Journal. She's also been a regular panelist on the PBS series Washington Week, and a contributor to Now with Bill Moyers. Currently, she's a contributor to Amanpour and Company on PBS, and check it out. The Ted Johnson Lecture, and all of y'all, we're honored to bring to you to the stage Ms. Michel Martin.
Thank you all so much for coming. I am very flattered that instead of preparing your appetizers for your Super Bowl parties, you all decided to come out here. I appreciate it very much. Dr. Guthrie, thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you all for the warm welcome. Thank you to the faculty. Thank you to the Evans family, to the students for having me, for inviting me, especially the Ethnic Studies Department and the BSU, and all those who helped to bring me here. I also want to take a minute to thank a lot of the people who I know are important to my being here, but who I may not see or meet personally. And by that I mean the building engineers, the audio technicians, the security personnel, the janitorial staff, the food service folks, all the ushers, Even if I don't see you, I see you. Broadcasting is a team sport, and so I think it's important to acknowledge all the people who help to make things happen. So, thank you. If nobody else has said thank you today, thank you. As Dr. Guthrie was saying, under normal circumstances, I would not be here today because I would be on the air right now hosting All Things Considered. And I usually tell people who ask me to do things, I'm not going to miss my show to do your show because that's not the way it works. But I mean, come on, Arizona in February? My mama didn't raise a fool. Also, it's always good to get a break from your context. I mean, we are in the thick of a presidential election year, as Mr. Evans pointed out, which now seems to have gone on forever. It's been 2 weeks into the impeachment trial, which also now seems like it's been going on forever. If any of you were stuck in your vehicles, the day before yesterday, you would have heard that I was on the air for 6 hours straight. Think about that, 6 hours straight. And unlike my guests, we call those anchor buddies, who come and discuss with you in their breaks, I can't leave. So just imagine what that was like. Just think about that. So the chance to come and visit with you and not just share my thoughts, but to hear your thoughts is appreciated. And it is truly an honor to be a part of this particular event honoring your esteemed faculty member, Ted Johnson, at this Ted Johnson lecture. Ted Johnson being the first faculty member of color here at NAU. I'm fascinated by it. I'm very respectful of firsts, partly because I am of that age where I was rarely a first to do anything. I mean, maybe the second or the third, but rarely the first. Like at my high school in New Hampshire, I was in the third class of girls, not the first. It was still not the most comfortable experience because people could be ridiculous, but they weren't as ridiculous as they had been just a few years before. For example, I remember there was this one girl at the gym one day who was paying a little too much attention to me. And when I asked her what was up, she admitted she wanted to know if black people were the same color all over. True story. Clearly, they didn't have HBO back then because you can see for yourself that everybody's the same color all over, right? But at least they didn't have to endure all the crazy stuff that the first class went through. I remember a faculty member telling me that a delegation of boys came to him and were complaining that the dorms would not be mixed gender and that visitation in the dorms between the genders would not be allowed, so-called intervisitation. And the faculty member told me that one particularly outraged boy said, "I can't believe you gave us girls and then you didn't give us anywhere to use them." True story. Ridiculous. And then I went to college, and after college I went to the Washington Post, where I covered local and regional news in Maryland. Then I got to cover the state legislature in Maryland, which is still one of my favorite all-time reporting experiences because this is people right at the beginning. I mean, and I hope that some of you will consider surveying or doing something at the legislature one day, because honestly, that is the room where it happens in a way that I think a lot of people don't realize. And when I later went overseas, when I was a White House correspondent and I went overseas, I remember going overseas right after the Berlin Wall fell, and I met all these legislators who had been, under communist control and were trying to sort of shape their democracies. It reminded me of the Maryland legislature. It was like, wow, like one minute they were brown bagging groceries at the Safeway, and the next minute they're making laws, trying to figure out how to lead their communities. So it's really one of my all-time favorite experiences. But one of the other reasons it's one of my all-time favorite experiences is that I met somebody who became one of my dearest friends, the late, great Gwen Eiffel, who was at the time, thank you, yes, give her the love she deserves. I mean, at the time, she was working for the Baltimore Sun when I was working for the Washington Post. Now, of course you know Gwen, she was a first. She was a first, she was a bona fide first. She was the first African-American woman to headline or host or anchor, whatever term you want to use, of a national political talk show. She had many, many honors and accolades, all deserved, including a new stamp that was just issued by the Postal Service on Thursday, and I certainly hope you will run out and buy some and actually send your parents letters, actual real letters. But this was before all this. We were just two political reporters early in our careers trying to learn the ropes. And we may not have been the first, but we were most definitely the few, which still seemed to throw some people for a loop. And part of the reason we got to be friends was that people were constantly confusing us. People would tell me, all these hot tips about stuff going on in Baltimore. And I would be so confused. I'd be like, why are you telling me about the plan to get density aid for Baltimore? I don't really, oh, right. And you think, and then people would do the same to her. So one day we said, you know what, if people were gonna constantly confuse us, we might as well be friends, because at least we'll get some tips out of it, okay? It got so crazy, I had name tags made up. Mine said, my name is not Gwen Eiffel. And hers said, my name is not Michelle McQueen. That was my pre-married name. We had a lot of fun with that, to be honest. The people who kept leaning into, oh, maybe not so much, but you know what? They should have looked harder, right? Okay. And then after that, after the post, I went to the Wall Street Journal. I was actually the third woman to cover the White House for the Wall Street Journal. There was a two-woman team there, which was considered quite remarkable at the time. That was Ellen Hume and Jane Mayer, and I hope you're continuing to follow Jane Mayer's brilliant reporting for The New Yorker. I think they may have been the first all-woman team at the White House for a national newspaper. So again, I wasn't the first to do anything, but it was still crazy. Like there was the time I asked a very senior official to explain the then first Bush administration's position on the reauthorization of the Civil Rights Act. I was interested in why, as part of the negotiations, the administration was willing to extend protections for race, but not for gender. And this very senior official looked at me sort of pityingly and said, I don't expect you to understand. And I looked back at him and said, well, English is my first language. So try. There were great moments too, don't get me wrong. I mean, I was assigned to the White House, as I said, when the Berlin Wall came down. And I got to ask President George H.W. Bush why he seemed so sad. And the reason I asked him that is that going over there, I thought it was going to be one of those, because we didn't stay at the White House briefing room, which is, if you've ever been there, it's actually a pit. I mean, it's better now, but it was a pit. It's still a pit. I mean, don't get me wrong. Tom Hanks, bless his heart, has gifted the White House correspondents with an espresso machine. Not that they need it right now, because they're never there, because there's never any briefings, but whatever, that's a whole other story. Anyway, so walking over there from my office, I thought it was going to be one of those bro-y, we're number one, USA, kind of moments. And it wasn't at all. I mean, I was just looking at him, and I was like, wow, this is what he's worked for his entire adult life in public service, and he just seems so sort of. So I just thought I'd ask him about it, and I said, gee, I'm surprised by your demeanor. I thought this would have been one of the best days of your life. And he said that it was, but he gave this long and very thoughtful answer about the hard road that would be ahead for the former Soviet bloc, and he turned out to be absolutely right. But that day, his answer was so noteworthy and so striking that the networks played it over and over again. And you wouldn't understand his answer without my question, so they played my question over and over again. Yay me. And I got all these nice notes from people saying, hey, that was a great question. What made you ask that? And I was like, seemed obvious, and that turned out to be a skill I did not know that I had. Asking, just paying attention, asking the obvious question that was right in front of your face that you didn't know you wanted to ask, but it turns out you really did want to ask. And it's a skill that's turned out to be very helpful in broadcasting. And I raise that because I think that part of the reason that I was able to do that, and a lot of the things that I've been able to do, is I didn't really care if people thought I was smart. I didn't really care if people thought I was whatever it is that they thought, I was supposed to be. And I think that is in part what comes out of being a person who doesn't always fit in, who doesn't always look like everybody else, for whom people maybe don't expect as much as they expect of other people. So I say that because I'm guessing that there are people in this room who probably feel that way. I mean, you probably feel like maybe I don't really belong here, or everybody's smarter than me, or richer than me, or better looking than me, taller than me, better at sports than me. And what I have found is that, your scar is often your greatest strength. The very thing that makes you feel like you don't belong is the very thing that may be the key that unlocks the very thing you were meant to do. So I mention that just to say that that's been my experience. I do want to talk a lot about journalism, but I just want to say on a personal note that, I love it. I love it, and I didn't always love it, and I didn't always love being me. And I'm guessing there are people here who don't always love being who you are right now. And my advice to you, not that you asked, but my advice to you is to stick with it. Just keep being you, keep being weird, keep being different, keep being whatever it is that you think makes you not quite right. Because that very thing is the thing that will probably open up the key to your next life. So, like I said, I've had a very interesting career. After the Wall Street Journal, I went to ABC News to launch a show called Day One, which turned out to be on Day 4, but that, whatever. And then after that, I went to ABC News Nightline, which turned out to be a very rewarding number of years. And then I went to NPR to launch a show called Tell Me More, and here I am. After Tell Me More had an 8-year run, was canceled, not my choice. That's a whole other story, but I mentioned it. It's been a very interesting career. It's been very fun, and it's been heartbreaking. It's been heartbreaking in equal measure. And I say that to you because, you might not have been the first or the only, but you were one of the few, and it can be odd and painful, but it can almost give you the quality of second sight. It's almost like because you don't fit in, you see things that other people don't see. I was noticing, and that's a lot of things. It's not just, you're given a born identity. It's a lot of things. I was thinking, the president of your university, Rita Chang, she was one of those people. I was reading in the bio that she was the first in her family to go to college, and she had to go to 5 universities in 4 states before she got her first degree. I really respect that. And I noticed that she was raising children while getting an advanced degree. I really respect that. I hope you really respect that. I personally was a grad student dropout. I had started my graduate studies in theology before I had kids. I got through my Greek okay, but trying to study Hebrew while pregnant, I don't know if any of you have ever tried that. I don't recommend it. People call it pregnancy brain. I think it's just really sleep deprivation, and there's a reason that it's in the Geneva Convention, okay? This is why I can still read a little Greek, but not a lick of Hebrew, so please don't ask. Some people have weird hobbies, what can I say? I went through all that in part because you can see that except for my stint in graduate school, in seminary, I'm a seminary graduate, which was a matter of personal interest, and having my family and raising my family, my entire adult life has been focused on journalism. But I think journalism is about more than writing or reporting stories about what the city council or the police department or the school board or your sports heroes or favorite celebrities are doing. Those are important in and of themselves. But what I hope it's about, what I think it's about, what I try to make it be about is truth-telling. And that is one reason I really wanted to come here today. I wanted to come because I wanted to talk to you about truth and why you have to keep searching for it, even if it's hard, and even if it is not fashionable or popular. And I don't just mean your truth, I mean the truth. And I don't just mean facts. Facts are important because they are foundational to truth, but they aren't the whole truth. And I say that because we are in a moment, it's like we're in a mood in this country when people don't seem to think that facts and truth exist. That all facts are just a matter of somebody's interpretation or an extension of someone's power or who has the most votes. But that is not true. I am here to warn that there is such a thing as truth, that it exists, that it can be elusive. But the fact that it is elusive does not mean that we cannot search for it. And it certainly does not mean that it does not matter. In fact, it matters to all of us. It matters a very great deal. It's existential. If it's something that matters to all of us, it's something that we all have a duty to pursue and to defend, no matter what field we happen to enter. By which I mean, it isn't just my job to search for the truth. Hate to let you know. Can't delegate that. It isn't just the job of the journalists who may be here to search for the truth, or the journalism students who may be here, the communication students who may be here. It isn't just their job. It's all of our job. It's all of our job not just to pursue it, but to defend it. Not just the facts, but the truth. How do we know what's true? Well, we're going to get into that in a minute, but first I want to speak again about why it's so important for all of this to take on. And a very simple reason is that shared knowledge and facts are at the very core of democratic civic life. There is a reason that the First Amendment is first, because the founders knew that the free flow of information was essential to the life of a free society. Benjamin Franklin wrote in the Pennsylvania Gazette, "Freedom of speech is a principal pillar of a free government. When this support is taken away, the constitution of a free society is dissolved, and tyranny is erected on its ruins. Republics and limited monarchies derive their strength and vigor from a popular examination into the actions of the magistrates." Ask yourself, why are we so suspicious of the Chinese government's handling of the coronavirus? Because we know that information in that country is controlled by the government, and thus their interest is in presenting information that suits their agenda. We know, further, that as an autocratic regime, they are not accountable to their citizens for their performance, except to the degree that unrest may jeopardize the leadership's control. So we don't trust what they're telling us, and we don't trust that they will act in the public interest rather than in the service of anything other than their own self-preservation. Now, this doesn't mean they're bad people. I don't know them. I have no way of knowing whether they are or aren't. But I do know that there is no system of accountability because there is no free flow of fact and information that would require it. The free flow of truthful information is important to everyone, but it is particularly important for the vulnerable, the marginalized, and those in the minority. Because those are the very people against whom lies can be most easily marshaled in the service of demagoguery. To put it plainly, the marginalized are the people against whom false information is most often and most easily marshaled. And why wouldn't it be? I mean, it's remarkable to me how often some of our sacred texts, those with which I am most familiar, the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible, warrant the importance of listening to the small voice, the voice of the one without power, the outsider, the minority. In the political context, a fundamental preoccupation of the founding fathers was the protection of minority rights. And it's interesting to me that when one speaks of minority rights, many conservatives jump to the notion of liberal snowflakery and political correctness. But in fact, one of the conservatives' most revered texts, Federalist Papers number 10, was written by James Madison, and it's preoccupied with the question of minority rights. He obviously was not talking about racial or ethnic minorities. He wasn't even really talking about women, because at the time, the only people who mattered in his universe of governance were white men, most particularly white men of property, but also just white men in general, because one of the central preoccupations of the Federalist Papers number 10 is how to balance the interests of the landed and the not landed, and those who had different roles in the society. Just speaking again about white men. It was his notion that setting up a system that would require diverse factions to negotiate is what would avoid tyranny and deep unfairness. He wrote, "The inference to which we are brought is that the causes of faction cannot be removed, and that relief is only to be sought in the means of controlling its effect." And that, of course, loops back to the need for people to be able to express their views, even if unpopular, especially if unpopular. Because that was the only way society could get to an honest negotiation that would leave people, if not fully satisfied, at least at peace, that their point of view had been heard. Again, for those who want to argue that this is liberal snowflakery, I direct you to William F. Buckley, the founder of National Review magazine, who wrote, "We are so concerned to flatter the majority that we lose sight of how very often it is necessary in order to preserve freedom for the minority, let alone for the individual, to face that majority down." As I said, this is everyone's responsibility, but no more vital than for the vulnerable. How often throughout our history have convenient lies been used to foment grievous harm? The Cornerstone Address by Alexander Stephens in March of 1861 lays out the purpose of the South's insurrection against the North. For those who want to say it was all about states' rights or self-determination, he lays it out plainly. He says, "Our new government is founded upon exactly the opposite idea. Its foundations are laid, its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based upon this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth." But we know it wasn't truth. We know it was a lie. And we know what happened. The founder of the first off-reservation boarding school for Native Americans, Colonel Richard Pratt, said in 1892, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that the high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man." And he said that was the truth. But we know it was a lie, and we know what happened. After the Pearl Harbor attack, the Assistant Secretary of War, John McCloy, said if it came to a choice between national security and the guarantee of liberties expressed in the Constitution, he considered the Constitution just a scrap of paper. And indeed it was. On February 19th, 1942, Executive Order 9066 was issued, and more than 120,000 US citizens were forced from their homes into prison camps. I know some people like to use other terms for that, but what else would you call it when there's barbed wire all around it with people ready to shoot you if you try to leave? And he said that, and he thought it was the truth. But we know it was a lie, and we know what happened. Why? Because of words, because of lies that were allowed to live as truth. And a lot of people say, well, you can't judge people because that's just what they thought was the truth. They didn't know any better. It was a mistaken belief. Sure. But there were always people in those eras who were arguing the truth. For every one of those statements that I have just read to you, as sickening as they are to us now, there were those who were arguing the truth as we know it today. There were those who were fighting this. In the example of the executive order against Japanese Americans, the Justice Department waged a vigorous battle within the administration at the time to prevent this. They lost, and the Defense Department prevailed. So I ask you, are you one of those who's willing to stand up for the truth, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult? The great historian Deborah Lipstadt, who teaches at Emory University, was sued for libel by a man she accurately described as a Holocaust denier. He waited until her book about Holocaust denial was published in England and sued her in England because she was required to defend herself there. That's the opposite of what it would have been in the United States. In the United States, the burden is on the person making the accusation. In England, interestingly enough, it's on the person who was accused, which I find rather remarkable. Thankfully, she won, and her successful fight was the basis of the movie Denial. And she is in Washington, D.C. for a sabbatical this year, and we had the opportunity to visit. And she reminded me of something very profound. She reminded me that all great injustices begin with words. With words. And I would amplify that all great injustices usually begin with lies. The lie that Black people are subhuman, the lie that Native people have no culture of their own and are in fact subhuman, the lie that Japanese people are inherently disloyal, not loyal citizens of the United States, and essentially not equal, and on and on and on. And that is why getting at truth, trying to get at truth, fighting for truth, is everyone's responsibility, and not just that of the select few. So let's get back to my earlier question, how do we know what's true? Well, it starts by wanting to know what's true, and not just what you want to hear, or what makes you feel good, or what sounds good right now. And that's one reason I'm so glad to visit with you here at a place where you get 4 whole years, or maybe for some of you more than that, to learn how to do that. And make no mistake, I would argue that it is as difficult as it ever was to get at truth. You are surrounded by garbage masquerading as fact. One of the major stories of our time is the rise of social media, and the rise of social media as a tool to destabilize democracies and disrupt elections. Now, I know people say, I didn't see any Russians in the voting booth with me, but yeah, they were there. They were in your head. They were in your head. And there's a complicated legal reason why the social media companies are not accountable, because they are not accountable for printing or for promoting false information. This is it's a complicated legal area, and I'm sure some of the law professors here, or the communications professors here have taught you this or have walked you through this. But the bottom line is that they can say whatever they want, and no one will be held accountable for it. Ibram X. Kendi, he's a professor at American University, wrote a fabulous piece in The Atlantic about this just a few days ago, where he talked about something called Black Matters US. And it posted a steady diet of images, sayings, and articles and videos that made Black people, as he put it, feel good about being Black and feel angry about being Black in America. And as the traffic for this site increased, the posts started to take on a more political tone. I mean, first it started out with repetitious videos of police violence and things of that sort. But then it started to veer into the political realm. Our votes don't matter. Don't vote for Hillary Clinton. A vote for Jill Stein is not a wasted vote. We now know that this all came from Russian operatives. The real mission of Black Matters US accounts was to troll Black people into not voting for Clinton in the 2016 election. I mean, Clinton already had problems, let's say, issues, particularly with younger Black voters, dating from her calling them super predators in 1996. But this problem became a crisis with Russian trolls relentlessly bonding her to racism and police brutality. Luckily, last week was National News Literacy Week. It's a project of the News Literacy Project. I normally don't like weeks and months and years to commemorate things, because there's like a week or month for everything. There's like a cheesecake week and chicken week. I'm so over the weeks. But this is a week I feel we all need to get behind. And you can go online and look at their tools, and I highly recommend this to all of you who are interested in this subject. Certainly if you're a journalist and you need to do this, but any of you who are interested, particularly in being thought leaders in your communities, I highly recommend this. And it's not that hard. Ask yourself some simple questions when you see a post or you see something that comes across your feed. Ask yourself, who's telling me this? What kind of information is this? Is this raw information? Is this just data? Is this entertainment? Can I tell you how many times people have been fooled by stuff that has been posted in The Onion? You know The Onion, right? Which is a satirical magazine. Do you know how many people have been fooled by posts that The Onion put up that they then reposted thinking it was like a factual news story? I mean, like, thankfully not me yet, but I mean, it has happened more times than any of us should be proud of. So ask yourself, is this entertainment? Is this opinion? Is this advertising? Is this propaganda? Or is this news? Ask yourself, why is someone sending me this? Is someone trying to get me to do something, feel something? And if so, what? Ask yourself, does this person have credibility? And if so, why? Why should I believe this? Does this person seem to be dependent on a particular source or type of source? Does this person seem to have an obvious or even not so obvious bias toward a particular point of view? Is this person constantly harping on one side or the other? Why? Start with the notion that you want to know as much as you can know, not just about what is being said, but why is it being said? How was this information gathered? And what is its purpose? Now, I know that sounds like a lot of mental work, but that leads me to another point. Why share things that you cannot yourself vouch for? That is my other request of you. Many cultures have a proverb about the dangers of gossip. about the ugliness of spreading false or harmful or negative information about something. Truth is something more elusive and profound, something more expansive. And it's not for nothing that the question of what is truth is a question that has preoccupied scholars and scientists and seekers forever. Those of you who are philosophy majors, bless you, because you're doing the heavy lifting of thinking about this all day. We can describe it, but we can't necessarily define it. So I'll tell you what it is for me. For me, it is a quest. It is a journey. It is something we can never perfect, but something we have to strive for. In my field, it's something we frankly know we're never going to obtain or achieve. Just like there's never going to be a broadcast that's perfect. Because we know there's always going to be something new to know. As I told you, I was on the air for 6 hours on Thursday. I was on the air for like 6.5 hours a couple of days before that. And I'm not going to devalue my own currency and embarrass myself by telling you how many, mistakes that I made, saying that the pages were sending I don't know why I said, sending Chief Justice John Roberts a letter. They weren't sending him a letter. They were sending him cards with questions on them. But for some reason, I couldn't get letter out of my head. So yeah, I messed up. Okay, but my reward for that is to come back and do it better the next day. And that's all the option that's available to us, to keep striving for truth. And then you know what? I'm humbled by this, but I refuse to be defeated by this. And in fact, I am relieved and energized by this, because I'm energized by the idea that there may and probably will be always more to know. You want to know one crazy example of this? The Kardashians. Seriously, the Kardashians. The cameras have been trained on them for years, watching them ugly cry and go on dumb trips to places they probably wouldn't go on for reasons that I don't even understand, okay? But what might be the most consequential story, the most profound story, was hiding in plain sight, which was Bruce Jenner's struggle to know himself and be true to himself, and to claim what he now understands is his true self, as Caitlyn Jenner. And I know it's easy to make fun of them. Of course, I make fun of them because, why wouldn't you make fun of them? Because why not? They can take it. But I find it so profound and so humbling and relieving in its own way, because it reminds me that real knowledge and real truth will be revealed in its own time. Maybe not on my schedule, maybe not when I want it to be, maybe not in time for certain votes to happen, but we know the truth will come out. And we are assured of this only if we keep seeking truth. Just last week was the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz death camp in German-occupied Poland by Red Army troops. There were ceremonies to commemorate this. It was very important because many of the survivors are quite elderly, and it was important to hear their stories while they are able to tell them, even if it's painful. One of the most amazing things that happened was that a collection of photos was recovered in time for this commemoration. These photos were kept by the deputy commander of the Nazi Sobibor death camp. They appear to include images of a name you may or may not know, John Demjanjuk. He was a retired Ohio auto worker who was tried in Germany for his time as a Sobibor guard. And according to the New York Times, this collection was unveiled Tuesday at Berlin's Topography of Terror, at the Topography of Terror Museum, and there are some 361 photos, as well as written documents illustrating Johann Niemann's career. He was the deputy commander of Sobibor from September of 1942 until he was killed on October 14, 1943, in an uprising by Jewish inmates. Unlike in many other cases, these photos were not destroyed after World War II. Many people destroyed them because they did not want to be legally implicated in the conduct that they or their relatives had participated in. But Niemann's family somehow held on to these, and they have now been handed over to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Experts say this collection enhances their knowledge of what Sobibor looked like, because between March of 1942 and October 1943, about 167,000 people were killed at this camp, almost all Jewish people, according to the Holocaust Memorial Museum. But following this 1943 uprising, Nazi guards shot the remaining prisoners and destroyed the camp in occupied Poland in order to cover up their lies and what they had done. How were these photos recovered? Well, surviving family members turned them over. And survivors and historians and all of us are very grateful that they did. The truth will come out. So the question becomes, what role will you play? What role will we all play? Will we be silent? Will we stand up? Will you be a truth seeker, even if, as the great philosopher Lizzo reminds us, the truth hurts? So thank you.